Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Brief. This week we're talking about a huge financial scandal that's sending crypto into chaos. A DEA agent comes clean about the war on drugs. Feds actually were involved on January 6th, and Ann Coulter gets shouted down at Cornell. Let's go. All right, Brad, you're joining us from your New York City hotel, it looks like. Very fancy.
Yeah, I'm in New York City for a conference for my fellowship, and I hung out with our friend Kennedy last night. I was on the show, and we went out to dinner afterwards, and it was very fun. But I already miss my boyfriend and my dog, so I kind of can't wait to go home tomorrow. But New York is kind of cool, I guess.
I was going to say, I feel like you wouldn't like New York City just knowing your personality, but
I don't.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like you'd vibe there.
But I do.
Well,
When I come, I only come to do good things. You know, like I only come if there's something exciting that I'm excited about doing. So
yeah.
while I don't love the city, I do find it dirty and kind of scary. I tend to enjoy my trips here because I only come if there's something really worth coming for.
Yeah, well, I almost booked a one-day trip to New York City last weekend because I was craving Sugarfish, my favorite restaurant, and it was the only thing in the world that sounded good to me because I am deep in the throes of what we call SAD right now, which for those who don't know or participate, it's called seasonal affective depression. So it's when you get actually literally depressed because the weather is changing and it's going to be cold. And I don't have it every year, but this year it is hitting me hard. It's already getting cold and rainy and gross here, and I know that it's going to be that way for the next 4 months till March, and I just hate it. I can't stand it. So I'm trying to think of things I can do to keep my spirits up. But guys, if you're like me and you also suffer from SAD, just know very relatable around here, and hopefully this podcast helps us get through the worst months. So
that sucks, but I have to say, I don't feel that bad for you living in Georgia about how your winter is going to be when I live in Michigan. I'm just saying.
I know. I understand, like, it's crazy that I have it this bad when I live so far down south. I don't know how people up north do it. I truly, truly don't. Like, you've got to have a different skin kind of thickness than me. I don't know. Like, something is helping you get through those winter months that I do not have.
Yeah.
But sending you all wishes. All right, well, we have a whole bunch of stuff to cover today. I really like our lineup. We want to start off by explaining what is going down in the crypto world. If you haven't been following, if you don't own crypto, you might have somehow missed it, but crypto kind of went into a tailspin earlier last week. And I don't own crypto. I don't really follow it that closely, but my boyfriend mentioned that it was spiraling and he thought it had something to do with the election. Turns out, no, it's a whole big mess. So Brad, break down for people like me who don't even know what FTX is before all this happens and what's going on and why it's impacting crypto the way it is.
Yeah, so first, a quick malpractice alert. I'm going to do my best to explain all of this. I'm not an expert. None of this is financial advice, and I may get a few things wrong here or there. But this is the biggest story in the financial world and in the cryptocurrency world that I can remember, because tons of people have lost huge amounts of money in this scandal that is deeply intertwined with government and politics. So I'm going to try to explain it, Hannah, for you and for lay people. But before I do, I just need to introduce two names and concepts. One is Sam Bankman-Fried. He goes by SBF is how he's known. And I knew of him a little bit, but only on my periphery. But he's essentially one of these crypto bro billionaires, except he's actually like a woke one. He's closely tied to the Democratic Party. He's given more than $40 million in political donations, including millions to Biden. He was actually the second biggest Democratic Party donor in this election after George Soros, who's a huge billionaire political donor. SBF, he founded this platform FTX, which I'll explain in a minute, but he's deeply connected with the government. He's been crypto's one of their go-to people in Washington, working with Congress to shape laws that have been proposed, in close contact with regulators. And the media has kind of, at least in the past, portrayed him as like an altruistic, like one of the good guys. Like he actually cares about social justice and ESG, environmental and social governance. Like a good capitalist who still is a liberal and believes in sharing it around or whatever. And now he has his life and his kind of house of cards has completely imploded. His financial empire has crumbled. His net worth has gone from more than $16 billion just a couple of weeks ago to almost nothing. Literally, Fox Business was reporting that it's estimated now at zero because his company, before they declared bankruptcy, was estimated worth at $1. So, Hannah, so far, how are you feeling about this guy?
Okay, number one, nobody should ever be allowed to dub themselves with an acronym of their name. Like, that is the single most douchey thing I've heard all day. He calls himself SBF. That's hilarious. But I want to summarize to make sure I'm tracking so far, make sure our listeners are tracking. So basically, this guy, young billionaire, he's an upstart. He creates a cryptocurrency, essentially. He creates his own coin, and he creates FTX, which is an exchange. A place where you exchange. So people are purchasing crypto through this as well. And I guess you could buy Bitcoin on that. You could buy Dogecoin on that. You could buy his currency, which is FTC. And so that's the setup. I find it really interesting that he is so plugged in behind the scenes with the Democrats and with politicians, because the one big takeaway I've had as I've been reading all of this is it seems like there was two main companies that were crypto exchanges. There was FTX, and then they had a competitor. And I find this really fascinating because I track antitrust, I track the FTC pretty closely, and for the past 2 years, the FTC has been running around whining about social media companies being monopolies, which they are by no means even close to being monopolies. And meanwhile, they're trying to break them up and overregulate them and come in and get control over social media. Meanwhile, this is a huge issue in the financial community, impacts tons of people's actual money and our financial security. And you have essentially two companies, so close to being a monopoly if anything ever was. And it appears he's coming in and telling them how he wants to be regulated, how they need to come in and govern this, which, you know, we point this kind of thing out all the time, but that is how regulations are almost always used. They are never about protecting the consumer. They are about protecting special interests, people who are close with government, and protecting government and giving them more power in and of itself. So that seems to be a classic example, but that's an outrage to me that the FTC has been wasting our time and tax dollars in these pursuits against Twitter and Facebook. And meanwhile, this was going on right underneath their noses, and nothing was even close to catching it until the whole thing blew up.
Yeah, and another federal agency, the SEC, it will get into some real embarrassing failures that we'll cover from them as well. But yeah, so you mentioned FTX. That is his cryptocurrency exchange, like a website where you can go and buy and sell cryptocurrencies. But also you kind of have your account on there, so your money is stored on there.
So it's
through
your bank.
These different. It's similar to a bank, yes. And FTX was the second largest exchange. You're right. There was one other, and it was close to a duopoly. They had most of the market share. Now, your money is supposed to sit there, but instead, right, like if you buy this much, they're supposed to hold on to it so that they could return it if everyone wanted to withdraw it. But instead, SBF misappropriated billions of it in ways that are coming to light. And he gave billions more to an associated investor that he was personally connected to, and the investments mostly failed, including doing this by leveraging his own crypto, which wasn't really worth anything, but he kind of pumped it up as sort of a Ponzi scheme to get into leveraging that to secure investment, money to invest, that he then went out and tried to build this empire, but bought a bunch of failing companies. So FTX was built on a house of cards, and their incredibly sus balance sheet was revealed by a crypto media outlet a little less than 2 weeks ago. It caused a run on the exchange, like a run on the banks. Tons of people tried to withdraw at the same time. Billions were taken out, and then they ran out and they had to stop deposits because they hadn't actually kept the money the way they were supposed to, and they had gone and done all these sus things with it. And so now a bunch of people seem to be completely out of luck and have lost huge amounts of money. And FTX executives are actually trying to flee to like the Bahamas or Dubai or places that don't have extradition treaties with the United States. So that is the absolute state of this crisis. Tons of people have been financially hurt by it. Tons of sus stuff going on here. And we can dive into the political ramifications in a second. But first, like, I think, I don't know about you, but for me, when people are trying to immediately flee somewhere without an extradition treaty, that's a sign they may have done something illegal and wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. I understand not wanting to take your bets with the U.S. justice system, which is very shoddy and shady. But on the other hand, yeah, if you're trying to flee and looking for places you can't be extradited from, probably you think you're going to be found guilty. So that's pretty indicting. But what I think is interesting here is essentially it was a Ponzi scheme because his currency wasn't really worth what he was saying it was worth. And the only reason it was able to stay afloat was because more people kept buying into it. And as long as nobody asked for their money back, Ponzi schemes can go on, I guess, indefinitely until somebody calls them on it and people start trying to draw their money out once and then the money's not there. So that seems to be what happened here. To make matters worse, though, is he was actually taking those people's money and using it for another investment firm that he also had ownership of, if I'm not mistaken. So he was trying to cover his balance sheet at another business with the money people were giving him at this FTX business. And so this was basically a criminal activity going on right underneath the nose of our regulators. And I find that really fascinating. This is a huge deal. I can't think of a bigger financial scandal since maybe Bernie Madoff.
Yeah, it is. And it's kind of the next gen crypto version of that. Let's just play. This was, I thought, a great video from the Nobody Special Finance YouTube channel summarizing this scandal in 90 seconds.
This is Sam Bankman-Fried. People call him SBF. He's the founder of FTX. He also controlled a crypto hedge fund called Alameda Research, but that's all gone now. He wants you to think he's this sweet guy. He even brought in a famous YouTuber who called him the most generous man in the world. Yep, that happened. Truth is, Sam Bankman-Fried is a liar and a crook. His personal crypto FTX token was basically a Ponzi scheme hidden below layers of Moonbro jargon. He even went on Bloomberg's podcast and bragged about it. Yep, that happened. He used his Ponzi token as collateral to borrow billions of real dollars that he couldn't pay back. He then used those real dollars to build an empire out of dying companies like Voyager and BlockFi. This led Jim Cramer to call him the new JP Morgan. That's weird. It's not like Jim Cramer to promote a billionaire con artist. SBF sold people cryptos like Bitcoin, or so they thought. What they really bought from SBF was an IOU. But as long as everyone didn't cash in their IOU at the same time, the scheme worked. Until it didn't. This other a-hole who hates SBF came along and engineered a bank run with some passive-aggressive tweets. It worked. SBF didn't have enough money to repay everyone at once, and now his customers have lost everything. He'll be happy to know that this is exactly how every bank in the world operates. So where did all the money go? He misappropriated $4 billion trying to save his failing hedge fund. Whoops, that's a felony. He spent $21 million on Super Bowl commercials, $5 million for the big guy, $40 million in campaign donations. I wonder what he wanted in return. And everyone who's pointing at this story and saying,
"This is exactly why we need to regulate crypto."
remember that SBF stole billions. That's already a crime. And he spent a lot of it on bribing politicians. Also a crime. In order to create a crypto monopoly for himself. Government regulations don't protect the customers. They protect the crooks. That's exactly what SBF was trying to do.
So hopefully that cleared it up for you guys. If my explanation left anything to be desired, it is pretty complicated, and intricate. But one point that's emerged from this is this capitalism run amok? Folks like Elizabeth Warren, who has really called on trying to regulate cryptocurrency, she put out a statement calling the industry smoke and mirrors and saying that we need more aggressive enforcement to protect consumers. The World Socialist website called this a damning exposure of the criminality of capitalism. A socialist professor, Richard Wolff, said that this was the latest in capitalism's history of get-rich-quick manias that victimize so many. An unregulated market with no government to bail it out when crypto's profit-driven players overdo it and crash the system. I guess I find this entire narrative kind of silly and frustrating because this is fraud. This is already a crime, right? According to Fortune, all the elements are in place for Justice Department prosecutors to bring a case under a federal criminal law called Section 1343, which covers wire fraud, a term that describes a variety of fraud committed with the aid of electronic tools. The statute carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. So this is already free marketeers, right? Certainly not an anarchist. Fraud has always been one thing we think the government does need to crack down on to keep the rules of the game fair in an open and free market. And when you lie to people about what you're doing with their money and you spend billions of dollars in ways you're not allowed to in shady personal connections, That's a crime. Everyone I've been seeing says that there's criminal exposure here. Obviously, he'll get due process and everything. But so that's kind of like saying, oh, well, we need to make this thing that happened more illegal, even though it's already illegal, so that it can't happen again. Like no, I mean, it's not capitalism, right? Just illegally scamming people is not what capitalism is. That's fraud.
Yeah, of course, Senator Karen rushes in to try to go after capitalism. I love that Elon Musk calls Senator Warren that. I think it's the best fitting term I've ever heard for somebody. But no, I hate that they do this because I feel like there is, to an extent, this urge to blame anything bad that happens in a capitalist system on capitalism itself. And it's like, you're conflating things. Capitalism basically means that people are free to buy and sell and trade without the government coming in and interrupting the relationship. It's a really pretty simple concept here. It's not that convoluted. And we always say, that we believe in a free market capitalist system. And the only reason that you and I would say we really believe in government is to come in and set laws that protect people's person and property, right? We think that in order for capitalism to exist and succeed, you have to have a governmental system that is complementary to it, that ensures people's contracts are upheld, that ensure things like fraud cannot happen, theft cannot happen. You can't just say fraud and theft happens when there's capitalism and therefore it's capitalism's fault. Fraud and theft occur under every single system known to man because humans are fallen and evil and they do bad things. And you could never create an economic system that corrects that. That's childish to think that you could. That is human nature, and you have to have laws that protect people because of it. And that's true if you're in a capitalist system. That's true if you're in a socialist system. That's true no matter what. I would say in a capitalist system, we actually do a better job of standing up and protecting people against theft and fraud and having their property taken than you would find under other economic systems. So I think this whole thing is utterly ridiculous to blame it on capitalism. And I also think it's utterly ridiculous for people to push for more regulations on crypto because of it. These things are already illegal. Putting in regulations is not going to prevent people from carrying out fraud. What it is going to do is prevent more people from entering the market, creating more kinds of exchanges, having more competition, more opportunities. And I already think you can see, because there were only two companies doing this, maybe it's already a little bit too tough to do it versus, that we need to come in and make it more difficult. And in fact, I think both of these companies are actually originate outside of the US because our laws are already so much denser around crypto. They actually are based. This one was based in Bahamas. The other big competitor is based, I think, in another Asian country. But I think that is an utterly ridiculous talking point. I think people need to start getting wise to this. The fact that every time somebody does something that's already illegal, politicians and people who are industry insiders rush in and want to create more laws and put more regulations in place instead of just enforcing the laws that are already there. It's disingenuous, and I'm tired of it.
Yeah, if anything, this is actually a story of regulatory failure because the bureaucrats and regulators at the SEC, they've been well aware of what's going on at FTX. Sam Bankman-Fried actually admitted that this is how it works in a Bloomberg interview a while ago. And they have not intervened. Instead, they've chosen to spend their time cracking down on Kim Kardashian for doing a commercial for a crypto company and fining her millions of dollars, instead of cracking down on literal fraud. They've also refused to allow a Bitcoin ETF, and I won't get into the details here because it's a little bit complicated, but essentially if that had been allowed by the government, that would have given people an alternative way to invest in Bitcoin without these exchanges or in a more secure way. And the fallout here would have been lessened, if not completely ameliorated. So the government already has its fingerprints all over this. I mean, there's also, and this will get into conspiracy theories, but just the facts, the government already has worked very closely. Both the Ukrainian government, the U.S. federal government, and the World Economic Forum, which is a global NGO, have all partnered with FTX to funnel government money from the U.S. to Ukraine, donations from the U.S. to Ukraine, other things, different sponsorships and partnerships, all of which have enriched SBF and enriched FTX. So if anything, the government has propped up this company that now has fallen apart like a house of cards. And yet some people think that the folks over at the SEC need to have been more involved, and that would have been. I actually think the answer is more consumer. One is to imprison people who defraud people and punish them. But also, folks, and I have a lot of sympathy for the victims of this scam. Let me say that. But folks have been warned about the danger of holding crypto on centralized exchanges. There's this saying in the crypto world, not your keys, not your coins. And if you purchase Bitcoin and then you hold it off an exchange on your own, it's a little more technically cumbersome, but then no one can control it because you're not through some centralized exchange. True crypto advocates and Bitcoin, which is different from a lot of the other cryptocurrencies, which can be spammy or scammy, have been saying not to leave all your money on these exchanges, not to trust these centralized companies, because that's the whole point, is that crypto is supposed to be decentralized. And a lot of folks didn't listen out of convenience or lack of awareness, and now they've been really hurt. And I feel very bad for them, but I do repeat that this was warned, that it was dangerous to trust these centralized exchanges, and now we are seeing why.
Excellent mic drop, I just have to say. All right, I want to move on to our next subject, which includes more government actors behaving badly. Actually, I think you could pretty much summarize most of our episode today with this type of headline, because we've got...
And most of all of our episodes.
Yeah. Yes. So yesterday, Brad and I saw on Twitter a major confession from a former DEA agent. It was reported by the AP. They had an exclusive on this. And they said that a disgraced DEA agent accuses his colleagues of joining him in skimming millions from drug money laundering stings to fund a worldwide joyride of luxury travel, strip clubs, and prostitutes. Let's roll his clip.
Jose Irizarry says they called themselves Team America, a group of jet-setting, high-living federal agents and prosecutors who were supposed to be fighting the war on drugs. But the former Drug Enforcement Administration star says they all knew that war was unwinnable, so they were going to milk it for all it was worth.
DEA is a game. The drug war is a game. It was a very fun game that we were playing.
The 48-year-old Irizarry pleaded guilty in September 2020 to 19 criminal counts, including bank fraud and diverting millions in drug proceeds. For years, the Department of Justice portrayed the San Juan, Puerto Rico native as a rogue agent. But Irizarry says the problems go much deeper.
They kind of painted me in this picture of that I'm this mastermind of what we were doing, and I wasn't the mastermind.
In fact, the DOJ has begun questioning as many as 24 current and former agents and prosecutors who Irizarry claims either participated in or turned a blind eye to his abuses.
So this guy is basically going down, but he's going down with a fight, and he's going to take a lot of people with him, it seems. The DEA has tried to claim that this was just one guy, and he was a mastermind, and it was just him doing this operation.
Sure.
But he's like, absolutely not, and he's named a lot of names, and according to AP, they are now questioning 24 current and former agents and prosecutors who he says participated in this or turned a blind eye to his scam. I'm sorry, I find it high-key hilarious. I love in this clip where he basically says we knew the war on drugs was stupid and unwinnable and, like, pointless, so we just found a way to basically start taking advantage of it.
I have to say my blood boiled a little bit when he said the DEA is a game, right? When he admitted it's all just a game and they're just winning, because I'm like, for you, it's not a game for the thousands of people that have been imprisoned over this stuff, or the families that have been broken apart, or the taxpayers who've had so much of their money wasted. It's not a game at all for us, but I think it's offensive to have him. But you know what? Kudos for honesty, I guess. Just admitting the quiet part out loud. And that's the thing. I can't say I'm that shocked by this. What is shocking, though, is to see him just admit it and just be like, yeah, LOL, we got that bag. But you have to feel like this is the tip of the iceberg.
I mean, but also, like, the real victims here, I think above everybody else, would be victims of civil asset forfeiture, because that's who they're largely taking the money and proceeds from that they're skimming, right? They're using the war on drugs, and that's where civil asset forfeiture came from, to come in and take people's money, take their property, put it back into their bank accounts, and then using it to fund luxury travel and all these kinds of, it's so corrupt, it's so disgusting, and it's sort of like, this is the, worst I've seen of it, but even when it's done in a legal sense, this is still kind of what happens. They're using these funds to pad their pockets of their of the police budgets and of their enforcement arms, and that turns into nicer cars for them, that turns into bigger guns for them, that turns into nicer offices, and all of it is like they are building this lap of luxury and building their position in society off the backs of people they're robbing, under the threat of the state. And it's just, this is why I think civil asset forfeiture and the war on drugs is so disgusting and immoral. Like, I think on its face, it's wrong. It's always wrong morally to imprison anybody for what they merely choose to put in their body. Like, there is no ethical justification for that. But then when you look what comes as of a ripple effect of the war on drugs and all these other secondary things that they do to people and under the name of trying to stop drugs, it's really just disgusting. I think this has been one of the biggest downfalls of our society and our government, and I cannot believe there are still people out there who support this or who fall for it, who continue to believe that this is actually something, one, that prevents people from doing drugs, or two, believe that this is something the government should be involved in. I cannot fathom it that in 2022 there are still people out there who think people should be in jail for drugs, who think the state should be able to rob its citizens over drugs. And you and I saw this with the Brittany Griner stuff when we covered that. You and I were both really shocked at the amount of people who were kind of like, let her rot, she shouldn't have been doing drugs. And I'm like, this is just, it makes me doubt evolution. Like, your brain should be evolving faster than this, honestly.
That's funny. But no, it's serious, and it's a game that these agents feel like they won, but they're not winning the war. The war on drugs is not working. If anything, the war on drugs has made our drug problem worse. A lot of the things that we have, like fentanyl, is a crisis in America that's killing people, but fentanyl only came really because it's easier to smuggle in small amounts, right? Nobody takes fentanyl on purpose in the doses that's killing people. It's that it gets mixed and laced like that in order to smuggle it better, because it's much stronger in smaller quantities than other forms of drugs that are similar to it. And I don't know a ton about this, but you can read from experts who've analyzed this ad nauseum. And then to see them literally admit, yeah, we would do these big elaborate stings, get the money, and get prostitutes and strip clubs and travel. And it's like, meanwhile, how much are we paying, all of us paying in taxes to fund these departments? And they're not only, wasting all of our tax money, they're also skimming off the top and going out on the town. It's kind of nuts to me. I'm also like, how is this dude not in jail? Like, what? He's just sitting there at the interview like, yeah. I'm like, shouldn't he be in jail? Like,
I think he's going to jail, was my takeaway. He's
Good.
Just not yet.
I hope so.
I'm pretty sure he's going down. Well, this was by no means the only instance we saw of an inside Fed going rogue. It came out this week. The New York Times did a whole deep dive into this, that there were FBI informants in the Proud Boys and actually at the Capitol on January 6th. I'm going to summarize the reporting here. They said the FBI had as many as 8 informants inside the far-right Proud Boys in the months surrounding the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. And this is according to recent court papers. The existence of the informants came to light over the past few days in a flurry of veiled court filings filed by defense lawyers for 5 members of the Proud Boys who are set to go on trial next month on seditious conspiracy charges connected to the Capitol attack. In the papers, some of which were heavily redacted, naturally, the lawyers claimed that some of the information the confidential sources had provided to the government was favorable to their efforts to defend their client against sedition charges and was improperly withheld by prosecutors until several days ago. Shocker. They said because all of the material remains under a highly restrictive protective order, it is not possible to know what the informants told the government about the Proud Boys' role in the Capitol attack. And they say the dispute about the informants and the Proud Boys came on the heels of revelations that the FBI also had a well-placed source in the inner circle of Stuart Rhodes, the leader of the Oath Keepers militia, which is another far-right group that took part in the Capitol attacks.
So, Hannah, I have questions. This whole, the FBI did Jan 6 is what, like, your super mega QAnon-loving Trump uncle will say at Thanksgiving, but I mean, they didn't literally engineer the whole thing and plan it like these people would say. But the fact that they had informants in all of these groups ahead of time, I'm like, well, why didn't they stop it? They could have prevented it if they knew this was going to happen. What were they egging them on? Like, why wouldn't they have put a stop to the crime before it actually happened if they had informants in the inner circles of the people doing this? And yet, it was a really bad event. It was a bad day for the country. But it's crazy to me that they seem to have known about this, have been plugged into these circles and done nothing about it, which, I mean, unfortunately, that's a tale as old as time, our intelligence agencies failing to stop things. But how even the New York Times is admitting this and reporting this now. This is not some kooky conspiracy. Like, this is reality, and I hope there's going to be a reckoning.
There won't be, but so there's one of two things that went down, right? So you either have a situation where the FBI had informants that were in the Proud Boys, and the Proud Boys were planning this out, and it was their intention to storm the Capitol on January 6th and overthrow the election, which is, by the way, what the federal government is trying to argue in court. And in order to do that, in order to get the charges they want, to prove seditious conspiracy, prosecutors have to show that the defendants knowingly entered into an agreement to use force to stop the lawful transfer of the power after the 2020 election. So in order to win the government's case, they have to prove that this was a full plot to show up on January 6th, storm the Capitol, and overthrow the election. But if that's true, if the government's case is true, that means the informants knew about it, and why were they not able to stop it? Right? That's the main question. Or the other situation is that they didn't have a plot, didn't have a plan, and then it becomes a question of like, did it occur naturally, or did the informants egg them on and maybe helped them to get to that level? Because we've seen other cases throughout the U.S. government's history where these kind of things have occurred. You have in recent history the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, which I think you are probably familiar with, Brad, but this is the governor of Michigan. And I think back in 2020, there was a conspiracy plot to kidnap her, but as it started unraveling, it came to be very clear that within the group of 3 men that were supposedly going to do this, one of them was an FBI informant and seems to have been egging things on and escalating things. You also saw this happen back in the 50s and 60s with the Black Panthers, where you had FBI informants who helped get to the basic assassination of Fred Hampton and ultimately killed themselves later on, but were very participative of that. And it's a question of what happens behind closed doors, because you and I can't say for sure that the FBI was making things worse or creating terrorists by these activities.
Yeah, we don't know.
But I think we don't know, but questions need to be asked. The same thing is true with Ross Ulbright. You know, there's really serious questions around his case, whether the FBI kind of framed him and set him up online with the Silk Road takedown. There's another instance that I think is crazy. Edward Snowden reports in his book from when he was at the CIA, and this is what kind of turned him against the intelligence community. His initial sort of this goes too far, but there was this Swiss banker that they wanted to have as an informant. They wanted to make him give them information, and he wasn't playing ball, and so they basically set him up to get drunk and drive home and get a DUI that they then bailed him out of, so that he had to participate and work with them. So like they do these kinds of shady things and orchestrate these sorts of things all the time behind the scenes, and I think it's time we start really looking into this. I did some research just to see like how much we actually know around that, and it's pretty murky, but I did find this interesting. There's a Schuster Institute senior fellow named Trevor Aronson who's been analyzing more than 500 federal terrorism prosecutions over 10 years, and he says that he found reason to question whether U.S. law enforcement is actually creating the very enemy that they claim to be fighting. He found that the FBI has, under the guise of engaging in counterterrorism since 9/11, built a network of more than 15,000 informants who infiltrate Muslim communities and ferret out quote-quote would-be terrorists. The Bureau then provides the means necessary for these would-be terrorists to move forward with a terrorist plot, in some cases even planting specific ideas for attacks. And he says the evidence suggests some of those under FBI scrutiny did not have the capacity for terrorism were it not for FBI undercover agents providing the means, including weapons and logistical support. And that's the kind of questions I want to have answered, because, you know, if you are talking to somebody who says, I want to overthrow the government, and then the FBI informant's like, oh, really? Well, here's an idea of how we could do it. Or maybe we should, you know, here's how you can get some guns to do this. Like, how complicit are these agencies in these actual events? I think it's a very serious question that needs to be answered.
It is, and it's just bonkers town to me that they even do these kinds of things, because there's a line where that's entrapment beyond a certain point, and there's also a line where it's like they're creating more problems than they're solving in a lot of these areas. I don't know, I find it so nuts, and just this stuff too feeds the conspiracy theories. Like, I try to be very careful about conspiracies and only going where there's confirmed facts, but I can see why some people, when they find out all of this shady, duplicitous stuff that our government's doing, go down these rabbit holes. I can see why people are drawn into that. I really can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. And honestly, like, we spend billions of dollars a year on these counterterrorism and homeland security agencies, and I want to know what we're getting in return. Like, are they actually stopping real threats, or are they out there egging them on and creating them, or overblowing? How many of them are actually there? These are serious questions that need to be asked. This kind of activity goes back decades, like I said, all the way back to the 50s and 60s, we know they were doing these kinds of things. And I think that we've seen enough in recent years, especially from the FBI, about corruption that is internal there and how they even, use their power to politically target people like moms at school board meetings. So we really need to start having a lot more transparency and accountability when it comes to the intelligence community at large. But I think this is a total kneecap to the prosecution for January 6th. Either way, They look really bad.
All right, well, we'll circle back on that story when we learn more, but now I want to turn to talk about Ann Coulter. For folks that don't know, Ann Coulter is a right-wing, previously super pro-Trump, now anti-Trump, actually, kind of nationalist, anti-immigration, conservative columnist and author, who used to be really popular, 10 years ago. She was like the face of the right or whatever, and now she's not so much. She's definitely lost some relevance, but she spoke at Cornell, where she's actually an alum, and she was actually a bunch of students students or outside protesters, to be determined on that, attempted to interrupt her speech and actually stop her from speaking. I want to roll a clip we've got from the Washington Examiner that shows you the tactics these activists were using. Take a listen to this.
Violence! We don't want you to speak here! Your words are violence! They are threats! You cannot be speaking here! Thank you very much. We have to drown you out. We're not here to listen to you. It's not worth it to converse with you. We do not want your ideas here. Leave! Leave! You can take me out. Leave! Leave! We don't want your ideas here.
If this takes more than 60 seconds next time, I'm going to wait for it.
We don't need you
Get a
here.
little more organized.
Your words are violence! Your words are violence!
Violence isn't.
In reference to illegal immigration, you once said, I don't want to get killed by ISIS, don't go to Syria. You don't want to get killed by Mexicans. There's nothing I can tell you. Well, in 1979, my father illegally immigrated to the United States from Nicaragua, and that is a thing I am very proud of. My grandparents who never learned English are more American than you.
So Hannah, I find this pathetic. Your words are violence. We don't want you to speak here. First of all, words aren't violence unless you're emotionally fragile. And in that case, you probably shouldn't be in college. You should probably be working on functioning like an adult. But also, we don't want you to speak here. Well, clearly there's a room full of people that do want to hear what she has to say. Whether to disagree with it, debate her in the Q&A, hash it out, sure. I'm not personally a fan of most of what she has to say, but you don't get to superimpose your woke judgment onto the entire audience that they can't handle hearing these dangerous words. Anytime I see somebody trying to stop speech with this words are violence approach, I get a little sick to my stomach because I think that's one of the most pathetic arguments out there. It's a real intellectual cowardice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't stand this kind of activity, and I feel like we see this increasingly on college campuses especially, and it blows my mind. Like, they're spending tons of money to bring in these speakers. It's their private property. I cannot believe that they continue to allow these people to act this way. They're children. They do not further the discussion. This is not, this is not productive for anybody. You're not doing anything to actually combat Ann Coulter's ideas or to push back on them, which, by the way, I happen to not agree with her on a lot. She's kind of a pretty far right to me sort of nut job. She was huge in the Clinton era. She hates immigration. Like, I don't like Ann Coulter, but the best way to defeat Ann Coulter is to show up with a better argument than her, or to not show up at all. She's fading from relevancy, as you said, that the classroom only looked like it had about 50 people in it, period. Like, if you're really that worried about her and her ideas and want them to die out, just don't give her attention. Don't go see her speak. Don't make a huge deal out of it, because honestly, when you act this way and throw a fit and it becomes a video and it becomes an online scandal, you're giving her more attention. You're giving her ideas more attention. So it's not only a ridiculous and vapid argument to say words are violence, it's also just completely counterintuitive. These people are some of the least strategic people I've ever met. I think it comes from a place of, like, they're not thinkers. They don't know how to actually debate. They can't stand up for what they actually think or push back effectively on what they dislike. They just know they don't like it, and they get mad when they have to hear it. And so they are trying to shut it down and shout it down. And I think that shows just, where we're at as a culture. And I think that's sad, because ultimately, I'm very passionate about people being able to stand up for things and know why they believe what they believe and be able to articulate that. I think it's important. I think it's important to understand the other person's side, right? I always say that if I cannot say my opponent's argument as well or even better than they can, if I can't express it that well, then I'm not ready to debate them. I'm not ready to have that conversation. I need to do my due diligence and truly understand where another side is coming from, and then make sure and check my premises that my argument is good, and then come in and counter it, right? And that's how you actually change people's minds, and I think that's how you make sure that you're smart and a critical thinker and not falling for straw men as well.
Yeah, and you had just a good point, such a good point a second ago when you said that nobody would have been talking about this. That's so true. Literally nobody would be talking about, outside of, at the campus, would be talking about Ann Coulter giving a speech at Cornell if this hadn't happened, if these activists hadn't tried to shout her down. And then it becomes like, I'm not a fan of Ann Coulter, but I will defend anybody's free speech, right? And that's why it's getting national coverage and news, because of these idiots. And it's like, they're the most counterproductive people ever, because by attempting to block her, which they were never going to successfully do, if anything, they just short-term could delay her. They actually gave her a massive national spotlight. I've said before, I've spoken at campus a few times, and I hope to do more in the future. The best thing that could happen to me would be to have somebody try to shout down or interrupt my speech. I'd make it a national news thing, be all over TV the next day. These people aren't strategic thinkers, and they're so short-sighted. But, Hannah, I do actually want to give Cornell some credit. And this is based on reporting from the Examiner, but officials at Cornell University said any student who was involved in shouting down a campus lecture by conservative commentator Ann Coulter last week could face discipline. Last week, Coulter was shouted down by a group of protesters who objected to her presence, but the university said it is prepared to discipline students who partook in the disruption. Here's a quote from a university official. The event was interrupted by attendees playing loud music and sound effects and shouting profanities. 8 college-age individuals were removed from the auditorium following Cornell protocols. All Cornell students among the disruptors will be referred for conduct violations. Cornell's actually apologized to Ann Coulter and said that this behavior doesn't reflect its values. I think that's great, because most of the time these universities are complicit in the anti-free speech atmosphere and policies. But in this case, they're actually doing the right thing. So I think they deserve a little bit of credit for that.
I love to see that, because I think you're right. So often, universities, public figures, platforms, they cave to this group of children, group of whiny babies who show up shouting and throwing temper tantrums and shutting down speech instead of checking them and putting them in their place. Like, it's the vast majority of people don't behave like this. The vast majority of people are, a bit more in depth, have the ability to actually entertain thoughts they don't hold, are able to have critical thinking and listen to people even when they disagree with them, and then push back, when they need to. This kind of little minority is tyrannical, and I'm tired of people totally fading and just giving them what they demand. So I love to see they're standing up. I hope more people follow suit. I think often they're afraid of the blowback. It's the blowback's not going to come. You're going to get way more support from people like you and I who love to see people actually taking a stand for free speech than you're ever going to get from these little mini Karens who want to run around and dictate what people can hear.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that said, let's go to the mailbag and hear what our listeners want us to hear. We've got some commentary, I guess, from YouTube this week.
Yeah, these are from from the YouTube videos, our full podcast and our other segments. Thin White Axe said, Hannah, your hair is looking good today.
Oh, thank you. Always love to hear that. Trent Dugan said, oh my God, yes, no more ads. Not sure what he's talking about.
Campaign ads. Because I
had
said, thank God, an end to the ads. So yes, I think a lot of people can relate to that. I'm so happy to not constantly be spammed with these stupid campaign ads over and over and over. It's so nice.
I live in Georgia, so.
Oh yeah, you're still going to get them.
I'm still suffering down here until sometime in December. All right, well, Ken Roy said, one of the biggest issues raised during the SC hearing was how is diversity defined? There is no universal definition, and it is not quantified either. So how does one know that diversity is being reached or not reached unless it is well defined? Good question.
Good point. I think the truth is they make up quotas. They think they have too many Asian Americans, and so they find ways to use the other parts of the admissions criteria to admit other kinds of people. Yeah, like I said last week, visual diversity is not enough. We need diversity of character, experience, personality, and backgrounds, not just skin level identity politics diversity at the expense of meritocracy. Now, this other one was in response to us reacting to Joy Reid's Republicans invented inflation as a term. This person, E.T., said, does Joy Reid not know that inflation is covered in high school, if not earlier? Plus, to throw out the much more arcane word lexicon in the same sentence is priceless. That's a good point for two reasons. One, yes, anyone who took high school econ knows what inflation is. But obviously, we knew that Joy Reid did not take high school econ from her other commentary. And then to say inflation was never in most people's lexicon. They invented it. Republicans invented it. And it's like you're using the word lexicon, but you're saying other people are using fluffy terminology. That is kind of funny.
That is a really good point. HB said, you two are so reasonable. I hope to see you on mainstream media more often. The TV and cable news outlets have become so toxic. We hope so too.
Yeah. Not Neuer, and I think this one is at me, says, blink, bruh. I forget to blink a lot. I don't know when I'm on camera.
It's definitely directed at you because all I do is blink. My eyelashes are so heavy. Garden Gnome said, come on, you two, you are only 5 minutes old. How would you know what was as opposed to what is you, this is a hard sentence. How would you know what was as opposed to what is? You weren't born when meritocracy worked. You should see some of the people I had to work with cause they were number makers. Some punctuation would be really helpful in that because I'm having a hard time breaking it down. But basically, we are too young to know history, I believe is what they're saying.
Yeah.
Is that the gist?
I know how to read books and talk to people
argument.
who are older than me. So.
But thank you for thinking I'm young.
So Dave said, I have a Brad Polumbo pillow too, ... Emoji, sorry. Ew. Down,
what
boy.
What does that mean?
Down.
I still don't understand what a sex pillow is. I'm so homeschooled.
This person was critiquing your calling Big Mouth a groomer show in this next comment, so you take this one.
All right, this is from Marija, and they say, a groomer show? Really PC bullshit. Big Mouth is an adult animation show like South Park. This need to assume a moral high ground over something is so lame. I mean, I'm just telling you how I felt watching it. I didn't call for it to be censored or taken down, but I can call it a weird groomer show if I want, and it is.
Yeah. I mean, look, I can't really comment one way or the other because I've never watched an episode, but the idea that it's about young teenagers and it's a sexual show is kind of weird to me. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I can't comment.
Yeah.
So this person said of the Big Mouth thing, it's not a strange coincidence at all because the writers of the show, mainly Nick Kroll, are big lefties with the usual left-wing mainstream talking points. And now that Brad is becoming more of a household name ever since base politics started, I believe they took a dig at him. Well, thank you for thinking I'm becoming more of a household name. That might be slightly overstating the case. But I do believe it's probably the case that one of these writers is aware of me. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, we don't think it's coincidental either.
I don't.
Sailor Mercury said, that is so strange. It can't be a coincidence. I heard about Big Mouth years ago and found it disturbing because of how sexually charged it was despite involving kids in it. I'm tracking with you, Sailor.
Rachel, and this is about our reaction to the SNL segment making fun of having COVID as a way to avoid, the struggles of life. Rachel says, Brad said it best. Humor is a way to process something that was heavy. They weren't joking about people being in the hospital on ventilators or the elderly. Side note, they could, and I would defend that if it was done in the right way. The people represented were young and seemingly healthy. It's a freaking joke, people. Chill and realize that this is how people move on from something that was challenging in their life. Don't like it, then scroll on by. Amen,
Lord.
Rachel.
Lord, yes. Scroll on by could be a great life motto for a lot of people. Scott Johnson said, my dad's official cause of death was COVID, right after it was called a pandemic on March 26, 2020. I don't believe that he actually died of COVID. He tested positive after the fact, but he had a heart attack. COVID may have caused additional issues in trying to revive him, but I don't for one second believe it was the cause. He had several comorbidities. At worst, COVID exacerbated issues with those comorbidities, but it was the comorbidities that got him. I had it, and it was no worse than a cold in my 50s with a couple of comorbidities. I found the skit hilarious. Thanks for weighing in.
Yeah, I think if your dad technically died of COVID, according to the hospital, and you can find the skit funny, then everyone else needs to be a snowflake, not be a snowflake, and cope. And so this person, Glenn, didn't agree with this, didn't like the skit, and said anyone who knows someone who died from COVID could very easily be upset by a skit that seemed to make light of it. Imagine a skit touting the benefits of losing a limb or a relative in combat during the war in Afghanistan. I don't have to imagine a skit because comedy literally jokes about war, death, HIV, AIDS, crisis, all these things all the time. And yes, they're terrible, and that's why comedy pokes fun at them to humanize and process. Like, I really am a believer in no holds barred comedy. Almost nothing should be off limits. It has to be done in the right way. It shouldn't be malicious. But yeah, for example, I find one of the most sad things for me to ever hear about or read is the AIDS crisis. But some of the comedy about it, especially from gay comedians and people who have a connection to it or were involved, is really funny, but also really insightful and really makes you think and feel. And that's the point of comedy. So I don't agree with this. Just because something's grave and serious doesn't mean it should be off limits for comedy. If anything, it's probably where we need some levity the most.
Yeah, I hardcore agree. By the way, do you remember the South Park? It was kind of an ongoing joke, I think, when they'd ask Cartman, are you sure? And he'd be like, I'm HIV positive. Like, yes. There's so many, things like that. I love don't South understand. Park. So good. I'll never understand people's inability to laugh at things, even things that are hard. I truly just think I want to study people's brains. I'm honestly, not to be mean, I'm just genuinely curious, how people think, how their minds work when they think like this, because I think it's kind of odd. And it's there's things I hear that maybe could offend me, but honestly, I just keep it moving. There's so few occasions I could think to where I'm just that person saying that really crossed the line for me. No, I don't like what they said. I might not like them because of it, but it doesn't impact me or hurt me, and I don't want to shut it down. We're very different people if that's your mindset. All right.
Yeah,
let's go to hot takes.
I completely agree with you. If I'm offended by something, I'm giving it power over me. And I'm very rare to do that unless I have some reason to actually care about it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Let's move on to hot takes. In the spirit of the holiday festivities that are upon us, my hot take is that Thanksgiving is the worst holiday of all holidays. I think it is pointless. I hate it. I think it's a pointless holiday. It's a lie. Number one, Thanksgiving is a lie. And the whole little happy story about the Native Americans and the settlers and everybody sharing food is BS. BS. Didn't happen. We killed the Indians. This is not how things went down. We stole from them. I hate the fact that this is what's told to school children. But even back when I believed that was true as a child, I still hated Thanksgiving. I just think it's very boring. The food's pretty gross. I don't like the decorations even. Turkeys are not attractive. I don't want to look at a turkey. Turkeys are gross. They are not cute birds. They're not.
You don't like mashed potatoes.
The one thing I like about Thanksgiving is I do like the Macy's Day Parade.
Oh, that's the one thing I don't care about. What about pie? Yeah. I love pie.
No, I don't like sweets. I will, if you were to offer me chocolate versus salt and vinegar chips, I'm going salt and vinegar chips every time. I don't care about.
I think this is your worst take of all time. Thanksgiving food is the best food all year.
Can't stand it. I really don't like it.
I love Thanksgiving. I love it.
It's really hard for me to have this forced gratitude on. That's the other thing. I don't like forced gratitude. I am a pretty grateful person by nature, but when you're forcing me to be thankful, it feels fake and phony. And I hate my mom always makes us go around the table and say one thing we're thankful for, and I hate everything about it. Hate it.
All right, Hannah hates Thanksgiving and hates America.
I'm the Grinch of Thanksgiving.
All right, then. I completely disagree. My hot take is targeted at the airlines because I've been flying a lot lately. I'm not thrilled about that, but stop saying that your snacks are cookies. That's not a cookie. Delta Airlines, that's a graham cracker. They always hand you, they say, what do you want, cookies or almonds or whatever? And you say cookies, and you expect to get cookies. And they hand you what is basically a large graham cracker bar.
Gross.
I'm like, that's not a cookie. Delta Airlines, I think that is fraud and should be investigated by the SEC. Because they are saying that they're going to give us cookies, and they're giving us a dusty little graham cracker bar. That's not a cookie.
Yeah, airlines could definitely step up the snacks. When I was flying in Europe a few years ago, back when I could still have bread, or I thought I could, I was on this airline. I don't remember which one. I was going to Amsterdam. And they gave out these little ham and cheese sandwiches that were so delicious and delightful. And I was like, what the heck is up with our airline food? They were fresh. Like, it was excellent. So yeah, step it up, airlines. All right, guys. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. And until then, stay based.